Phala saga, and this is because the president is now expected to launch an urgent application at the Constitutional Court today as he takes the report on legal review. Tomorrow, the National Assembly is expected to deliberate on the independent panel's report. Let's get more perspective now, and Professor of Political Science at the University of Johannesburg, Mcebisi Ndletyana, joining us now for this conversation. Prof, thank you very much for your time, and I know that you have been poring over this report throughout the weekend, so we're going to get into specific examples in a moment. But let's start with the president, who reportedly just a few days ago was ready to resign. Where does he suddenly find the newfound strength to take this report on legal review, and what are his chances of success?
Well, I'm morning for it. Delighted to be here as usual. Well, I'm not sure why he thought that he should leave. Because this report is not, there are many loopholes here. I don't think that he was given the benefit of doubt. There are certain things that were not probed thoroughly. So it's not a solid basis for him to leave, nor is he required to leave, right? That's the thing. So the key thing is to find a platform where you can air all facts. Let's get to the bottom of this. And hopefully the court will do exactly that. It will look at all the evidence. It will get evidence elsewhere. Because this panel was kind of limited in a number of ways. It was a quasi-legal process without all the resources, for instance, to call people, to question people, to seek evidence elsewhere. And because of that limitation, it then was not able to unearth everything. So it then reached a conclusion on the basis of narrow information, hearsay information. So I would understand, for instance, why the president is going to court, because there are certain questions that still has to be answered. But at the same time, I'm also a little bit concerned that he sort of wanted to resign, unless he thinks that there is a smoking gun somewhere which will be found. So he wants to flee before it gets found, right? But on the basis of what we have now, there's really no reason for him to step down.
Yeah, all right. Let's then get to the examples. Let's get to the source of the $580,000 which goes missing. The source of that money was a Sudanese national, a Mr. Haziz, who goes to the farm unannounced in December of 2020, and he buys the cattle cash. One, do we know whether indeed he is a person who exists? Because the panel does seem to cast doubt on that. But second of all, why hasn't he fetched his cows?
Well, I don't know why the fellow has not fetched his cows. I can't be expected to answer that. And the person who can answer that is Mr. Haziz himself. You see, you can't blame, for instance, the president about the things that Mr. Haziz did. Him bringing in the money, him not fetching his cows. The panel should have had capacity to determine who this fellow is and where he is. That is part of the limitation about this entire process, Tony, is that you have a panel set up to look into something but doesn't have sufficient capacity to get to the bottom of it. And strangely, they then reach a very kind of definitive, a thing to say there is a case to be answered here, when in fact the entire evidence doesn't lead to that definitive, a conclusion. There are doubts here. I would have expected, for instance, for them to say, look, there's very little here. There's hearsay information. We can't determine conclusively that there is a case to answer. That was an option open to them. And that would have been a very understandable conclusion, that we have looked into this. It's all hearsay. We don't know where this Mr. Haziz is. We can't find him. And we don't have capacity to find him. So then why say he does not exist when you haven't even made enough effort to find it?
Okay, but
the most logical conclusion would have been there is no there. Let other bodies who are more capable to investigate these things do exactly that.
But here is the part where the president at least should be answerable, and that is when this purchase was made, whoever the farm manager may have been at the time, and Mr. Ndlovu, we understand, surely there must have been an address that was left behind to say, this is where you are going to deliver these goods to. Does the president provide that?
Well, I'm not sure if, for instance, Mr. Ndlovu was going to be the one delivering the cows, or whether Mr. Haziz was going to come and fetch them. And as to the receipt, I mean, I don't know what kind of receipts they are meant to have. But these are the questions I say still have to be answered. And the best way to get at the answers is to afford people with enough capacity who are trained to those things, to do it.
Okay.
Not give to a body with very good intentions to investigate something for which obviously they have serious limitations, right? And yet reach conclusions on the basis of insufficient information. That's the problem about this.
All right. What about this other element, Professor? And that is that the president seems comfortable with the fact that he says he reported this to Wally Rode. Wally Rode is head of the Presidential Protection Unit at the time, and Wally Rode is not a police station or a police commander at a police station. Huge money goes stolen at his farm. Why doesn't the president follow up?
Well, according to the president, he thought once he had told Wally Rode, who's, by the way, a general, I think, in the police, that was fine, because Wally is the police, according to his own understanding, right? So you need to at least allow for the possibility that the president thought he was right. Because this whole thing rests or revolves around whether or not there was wishful, malicious violation of the law. Did he do this thing in bad faith? Or did he quite reasonably think that if I tell Wally, because Wally is the police, a general in the police, this thing will be taken care of? And that's what the law requires, that you must allow for the benefit of doubt. You must allow for the fact that he had a different interpretation of this. Is there evidence to show that Cyril Ramaphosa did this thing maliciously? That he knew what the law was, but decided to hell with the law? I don't think so. But there is an allowance, and I must emphasize this, there is an allowance for the benefit of doubt. You have to prove that he did it in bad faith. And I don't think telling Wally is not something that you would expect to look back. This guy is a policeman. If I tell him, he will report and all that. But it doesn't look like the judge believed all that. This is conviction by notoriety. It's as if he thought Cyril Ramaphosa was already guilty. He is notorious for what exactly, I don't know. So he decided that of these two versions, he will not believe Cyril's version, but he will believe Arthur's version, for instance. You know, that is conviction by notoriety. It is something that, doesn't happen. You have to test the evidence. You have to have the evidence to reach that conclusion.
Well, Professor, you then lead me to my final question to you. And just based on exactly what you've said, that two versions, and the president's version is the least believable, according to what you say is the panel's approach to this. So, yes, you leave me with one question, and that is, what do you believe were the competencies of this panel, and perhaps more importantly, intentions of this panel? Because at least one member of this panel is being crucified on social media and elsewhere to say, well, she was once linked to Ace Magashule and she was part of that legal team, and therefore, what would you have expected?
I wouldn't cast aspersions on any person. These are kind of limitations, institutional limitations, Polly. We are doing this thing for the first time, and therefore there would be some problems. There would be some issues because we are kind of learning as we go ahead. Essentially, an impeachment is a quasi-legal process, but it is fundamentally political. It is political warfare, right? Here, the judge, they are meant to do something in a kind of legal way, right? It's meant to have a sound legal conclusion, but it doesn't have all the legal resources to reach that conclusion. So here is a dilemma. It's a kind of deep-seated limitation in this process. It has nothing to do with the personalities. So what this means is that perhaps next time around, hopefully there won't be a next time around, we'll have to think of giving them more powers to investigate, to get more evidence, to call people, so that whatever they have in front of them allows them to come up with a sound conclusion that is not questionable. This conclusion, because of these limitations, right, is fundamentally questionable. It has nothing to do with them. It is simply a problem, for instance, which we do not foresee in this case.
And so, based on exactly what you've said, is the president likely to win in court? Is that your conviction, at least?
Most likely. I think most likely because, I mean, there are serious loopholes there, Cody. If you read that thing, just noble. They sold themselves extremely short. They should have just said, there isn't much here to reach something thorough, to say this or that way, and say, let's leave it to properly trained, bodies to do a thorough job. Yeah. They just did not have the tools to do a thorough job. And I don't know why they didn't just confess to that.
Okay. All right. And let me squeeze one final one to you. You said a little earlier that you were not sure whether the president thinks that there might be yet more skeletons to tumble out of his closet if he was so ready to resign. Does that not speak to a person who says, for the sake of my personal integrity, you can't hold me to ransom in trying to save this party, which, by the way, we are told he has more approval ratings than the party itself? Surely the president has got to have some latitude to say, for personal reasons, I've got to leave.
Well, this is political warfare. There will always be dynamite thrown at you. As a politician, especially at this time here in this country with all these things that are happening, he has lots of enemies. You must expect that there would be people coming at him with all sorts of things. So I'm quite surprised that he would even think of running away. I mean, that's literally running away. Unless, again, I come to this point, unless he thinks that it is safe for me to run away before they discover real evidence. The only reason he would run away is exactly from that, if there is anything seriously implicated. But as of now, as things stand now, there is no reason for him to quit.
Professor of Political Science at the University of Johannesburg, Mcebisi Ndletyana, let me thank you very much for your analysis of this situation. Well, there is the process of the Hawks that is ongoing, SARS, and the South African Reserve Bank. Might the professor be on to something here? We don't know as to why the president was ready to resign. Could there be more skeletons to tumble out? We don't know. We'll have